Welcome back to another AskReddit story by mr.greatstory. Divorce lawyers of Reddit. What's the most outrageous reason someone filed for divorce? My dad was a divorce lawyer. He had a client who wanted to divorce her husband for two reasons. He did not have enough hair on his chest. He did not drive fast enough. Keep in mind this was in the 70s when chest hair was a bit more important. My aunt was dating an unemployed dude for a while. He was staying in her house rent-free. They got married and were getting ready to go on the honeymoon when the new husband tells her he's not going because he has to take care of his plants at the house. Big fight. Aunt goes on the honeymoon with her sisters instead. She comes home and tries to kick him out of her house. He refuses to leave. She tries to get the police involved. Dude is live streaming on Facebook how he is being trapped in his own home. Police tell my aunt there is basically nothing they can do. Can file for eviction after a divorce. Dude gets to live in her house with his precious plants for like 3 months until everything legally gets worked out. Paralegal. A couple got divorced over a cat. The wife called cat Snowball because of white fur and only wanted the cat to eat wet food or chicken breast. The husband called cat Lily again because of white fur and believed it should only eat dry food. These two argued for a year over custody of the cat, but did not give a shit about their human kids aged 15 months, 4 years, and 6 years old. My 90-year-old client, the husband, and his son retained me to initiate divorce proceedings with his 88-year-old wife. They'd been married 60 years. The wife had recently taken to beating him with his own cane because their daughter poisoned her into thinking he was hiding money from them. The battle came down to husband and son versus wife and daughter. At their first court appearance, my client showed up in an old 1950s style pinstripe suit and fedora. He was a farmer his whole life, and this was clearly the only suit he owned. He was such a meek and lovely old gentleman. I had to pass my client on to a new lawyer midway through the proceedings because I accepted a job in a different country, but I understand the divorce was eventually granted. Colleague handled a case where money was not an issue, but the kids were. Neither parent wanted them. My mom worked in abuse and neglect counseling and juvenile justice. There are a lot more cases like this than I'd care to admit. Parents divorce and neither side wants the kid. Some of them are that neither side wants a kid but will fight over another kid. If ends up totally screwing them over because they have to live with the fact that their parents didn't want them. I represented a porn actress/webcam model who filed for divorce from her husband, who also did the porn/webcam model business. He would do gay porn on the side because the pay was better. She was hesitant about it, but dealt with it because the pay was decent. Both sides had an agreement that it wasn't cheating as long as it was for work. One day she came home early and found her husband in bed with 2 men. They were not filming. That was too much for her. Needless to say, the old conservative judge couldn't wrap his head around this one. Not a divorce lawyer, but I had a friend whose parents divorced for irreconcilable differences over time spent playing EverQuest. My grandfather's brother was a judge who presided over state issue marriages from time to time. One couple he married returned 6 months later to confirm the wedding and end their trial marriage when he thusly informed them that there was no such thing and that they had been married for 6 months. They subsequently broke up. I didn't like her anymore 2 days after being married. She was kidnapped in Mexico and he refused to pay the ransom. Eventually, her family managed to pay and she was left on the side of the road. It is not outrageous as in petty, but outrageous as how absurd that is. Edit to answer all the questions. I don't know how much they wanted as ransom, but it was substantial as the conversation between her family and him was how he had it liquid and they had to liquidate investments to get that amount. She may have told me, she may not. Something in pesos and I didn't know the conversion rate. It was all a random number to me. This happened about 7 years ago. He wasn't with her on the trip. She was traveling with cousins and went downstairs alone to get ice cream and wait for them to get ready. I do not know all the details. She was extremely distraught talking about it, and it was not necessary to pry. It was clearly traumatic, and even though I had a million more questions I left it alone. I knew a guy from a high school job who divorced his wife of 2 months. because she would sleep with a night light, but he could only sleep in total darkness, as they apparently never lived together until after getting married. He hated her nightlight so much that he would often sleep on the couch instead, but sometimes he would claim the bed for himself and lock her out of the bedroom for the night. This was an eccentric late 40s man working at a Burger King who acted like all the other high school coworkers were his best chums and often told us these weird stories. I'm glad I don't work with him anymore. Failed exorcisms. The client had an inner ear condition that caused chronic vertigo, but symptoms could be treated with medication. The husband was an evangelical who was convinced his wife 1 had become possessed and that her vertigo and general crankiness with his methods were evidence of demonic possession. 2. The medications she was taking was enabling the devil to hide inside her. And 3. The only proper recourse was an exorcism. He would hide her meds until she got dizzy and then try various methods of exorcism. This included sweating it out, put under blankets, while incapacitated and locked in a room full of space heater, freezing it out, pretty much the reverse with fans and bags of ice. Surprising it out, he would jump out and scare her like it was the hiccups, but instead of yelling back "boo," he would recite the Lord's Prayer or Psalms. The final straw was that he tried to surprise it out of her by pushing her down the stairs when they were heading out for dinner. Note, this guy was some type of executive and they still went out to dinner after the stairs incident. She asked for the divorce at an Applebee's that night. I have often tried to picture that conversation, as she was adamant that he was a total sweetheart and never acted out of malice or anger. He had an argument with the new in-laws during the wedding and moved out at around 5 AM during the first night. I was a legal assistant when this case came in, but this lady divorced her husband of 2 months because he got her an iPad case for her birthday instead of the expensive jewelry she wanted. I dated a girl that didn't speak to me for a day or 2 because I got her an iPad instead of jewelry. Her reassuring was because I could just use yours. I'm glad that relationship is over. Man, I was going to say that our client was served divorce papers for sending a couple $100,000 overseas in a scam, but damn you guys got better ones than me. Edit, it wasn't a couple $100,000, but over $500,000 Australian dollars. Emailing to a Baltic woman back and forth over a period of time over which he sent the dollars totaling to the $500k plus. No video calling or anything, just emails. My client put his wife in an assisted living facility based on a misdiagnosis, the medication which caused the wife to be unable to care for herself. While in the facility, my client Shocker started dating another woman and methinks began using hard drugs. He used a lot of money on both of these things. She eventually got off the medication and got better. Suffice to say, she was not happy about what had transpired. A friend of mine divorced his then wife because she would only speak French when her family would come over. She was Spanish, as was her family. To add, her family spoke English, French and Spanish. He could only speak Spanish and English. She got bored of being married to him. Her family basically talked shit about him whilst he was there. Was only when he recorded a conversation whilst they were there and got it translated he found out what was going on. Oops. Wasn't the reason, but it happened during the course of the divorce. Neither side would follow the court orders. When they had to go back to court they were fighting over a pistol and the man's grandmother's bowls. I assumed for weeks that these bowls were some sort of heirloom or expensive china. When they finally brought the bowls in to swap they were fucking Tupperware. Staff attorney for a judge. Not a divorce, but a custody modification hearing. The ex-wife wanted sole L&P custody of the kids because the ex-husband was spending all his money on a palm reader / psychic and refused to pay child support. On cross, ex-wife's attorney got him to admit that he was spending all his discretionary income on this psychic. He said he had spent over $5,000 on readings and other services there. Judges frequently chime in with questions in domestic matters, so my judge asked why he was not paying support as his divorce decree required. His explanation was the psychic could read that his children were provided for without his money and he would be able to repay the ex when he takes the children to Mexico permanently to seek great riches there. which my judge read as my psychic told me to kidnap my kids. TL. Doctor, deadbeat ex-husband spent all his money on a psychic, rather than child support. Told the judge he intended to kidnap his children. Edit. Words. My client was the outrageous one, so my heart went out to his poor wife. He had OCD which manifested primarily financially, so he made their lives a penny pinching hell. Examples. He was obsessed with avoiding unnecessary driving, wear and tear on the car, gas expenses, so he cut the whole family's hair at home and never let them eat at a restaurant or go to the movies. Weirdest of all, he kept one toilet paper roll on him at all times, and you had to get one square from him before you could go to the bathroom. He never gave more than one square. The wife finally got fed up and left him when 1. He gave her bangs during an in-home haircut, and 2. Their daughter was so traumatized by the toilet paper thing they couldn't potty train her. Also, he hated paying his divorce lawyer bill. He was also an old-fashioned mega Catholic who considered divorce a deadly sin. He viewed my whole job as an unnecessary and sinful expense. Not me, but a friend my mum has divorced her husband because his mother still coddled him at age 40 with his consent. They lived with his mother, common in Asia. By coddle, I mean that she would walk straight into their room after his shower and powder his back for him. They couldn't lock their bedroom door because his mother would come in as and when she wanted. If they locked the door, she would knock repeatedly asking what they were doing. Lol, what would they be possibly doing? Playing poker? Viralegal here. Still, remember an early case I worked on. A man divorced his wife for her bingo addiction. 10 to 12 times per week she went to bingo. She was 82, he was 86. But the all-time greatest to 20-somethings, they were irreconcilable because he kept smoking her weed stash when she wasn't home. I worked as a paralegal for a divorce lawyer. Case analysis was one of my main responsibilities. I shit you not. A recently married couple of 2 years broke it off because the husband would not stop feeding the dog. The dog got outrageously fat. Apparently she saw connection between the dog and future children. He was frustrated by her hoarding. She was frustrated by his utter uselessness. He filed for divorce, and she was my client. Her prized possession was a room or two full of scrapbooking materials. His prized possession was a yard full of junk cars that he never worked on. They had no children and no real assets. They hated each other more than any two people I'd ever met, and the only terms they would agree to were these: he gets the scrapbooking stuff and she gets the cars. My client also took the house, as he had no income and didn't want it anyway. It was the shortest divorce decree I ever drafted. I intentionally squeezed it onto one page, and the judge and I had a good laugh over it. Once the decree was signed and filed, she hauled all the scrapbooking stuff to the yard, and he removed it to the dump. She then called a junk shop I referred her to, and had all of his cars removed from the yard. Edit. These two also fought over a toilet brush, as he didn't want to have to buy one when he moved out. I politely instructed my client to give him the goddamn toilet brush. He got drunk at the wedding, she did not like it, and decided to divorce him right after the honeymoon, which she went to without him. Moreover, this was all an elaborate scheme of divorce robbery, because the guy was loaded, and so was his entire family. They were loaded because they were a family of excellent lawyers, and he was a third-generation lawyer, with all the smarts and experience of his predecessors combined. Let's just say it did not go well for her. Was a loud chewer at the dinner table. He developed a complex and literally needed out as he couldn't bear to eat with her. Edit. This has gone gangbusters. Thanks guys. I worked for a law office where the owner would talk about the man who sued for divorce because his wife would no longer allow him to use a loaded gun as a marital aid. She had apparently agreed to it at some point and was fine with the gun as long as it was empty, but that just wasn't good enough for him. Eater, since some folks need it spelled out by marital aid, I mean a dildo. He wanted to stick a loaded gun in her vagina as part of their sex routine. She was down for it, as long as the gun was empty, but that wasn't good enough, and he thought this was reasonable grounds for divorce. Also, I wasn't trying to be pretentious by saying marital aid, I just really didn't want to have to type out that he wanted to use a loaded gun as a dildo, but I guess nobody's leaving this thread happy today. not a divorce lawyer, but used to practice criminal defense work. Once had a heavily pregnant client that attacked her husband of less than a year with an iron. Said client was now sitting in a police cell, sobbing and insisting that her husband deserved it and she wanted a divorce. I asked what he had supposedly done, assuming he cheated or something similar. Turns out she'd checked his phone and found a single porn site in his browsing history from over 2 years beforehand. Not the most pleasant thing to discover, but hardly worth battering him half to death and demanding a divorce. Thank you for watching. Tell me which one was your favorite. Like, subscribe and hit that notification bell for more. The next video will be even more interesting. You are a legend.